Hi, my name's Kapish, and I'm going to be talking a bit about something called Gurukul. Now, there are only a few things that bring me genuine joy in life, one of which is my adopted religion. I am primarily a Zen Buddhist, and what's brilliant is that a flyer for this program run by the Tibetan Buddhists essentially just landed in my lap. Now, I've literally written a book about Buddhism, so naturally, my curiosity was piqued. So my first question was, what is Gurukul? Let's answer that with some history.
I now call upon Your Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama.
To make a really long story really short, His Holiness the Dalai Lama won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989 because he's a really cool guy. So to continue working on his quest for world peace, in 1991 he started giving workshops on what he called universal responsibility. And then in June of 1993, the living legend organized the first ever Gurukul program. Now, I can't really say much about how it's evolved over the years, but in the 27th annual Gurukul program that I've received the privilege to attend, we basically get to experience Buddhism for dummies over the course of 3 weeks. During these 3 weeks, we'll be living amongst practicing monks in monasteries and nunneries, interacting with Buddhist masters and scholars, experiencing the core involvements of Buddhism, including the dialectical debates and spiritual chantings. We get access to some really cool Buddhistic philosophy courses, we get to meditate amongst the Sangha, interact with eminent scholars and civil society leaders, learn about the traditional Tibetan arts, crafts, music, dance, medicine, and astrology, and the icing on top is that we even get a private audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In other words, I don't care what you call it, this is a 3-week Buddhist retreat. Now, before I can get to the actual Gurukul segment of the video, I can only present so much, which is why of the things I'm going to present, I've chosen to separate them into 3 cultural segments. First up, we have Kailash Bauda. Our first session was with this guy. He's His Holiness's official Hindi translator. He talked about the complexity surrounding translating Tibetan and told us about how he willingly chose to learn the language. He went against all that he was told and ended up doing what he wanted to do. And he's sort of brilliant at it. He's also pursuing a geisha. It's a very esoteric degree which takes at least 16 years to attain. For reference, it takes about 12 years to become a neurosurgeon. Learn more about him and his life on his YouTube channel linked below. Next up, we have one of the highlights of the program, the legend himself, Geshe Laktor. He's been entrusted by the Dalai Lama to take charge of the Tibetan Library and Archives. This is him discussing Buddhism with Richard Dawkins. This is him giving a TED Talk. And this is his face immortalized at the Tibetan Museum. Now, we talked about it for a bit outside the sessions, and it appears that we disagree on the nature of free will. But what really gave this man merit in my eyes has nothing to do with his endless credentials. It had to do with the fact that he's one of the few Buddhists that so explicitly makes an absurd yet comically bold claim. One that I believe is undeniably true. That the average civilized human being is hallucinating.
Then perception right here and right now is also a kind of hallucination.
But in fact, we're constructing everything that we see.
And continuously having hallucinations.
That I, who essayed to do all this, am a hallucination.
I want to use a more effective word. Because of the influence of athletic emotions, we are more or less under big hallucination. So do you need more hallucination? By resorting to all these drugs? So you don't need more hallucination. The hallucination that you have right now is more than enough. अभी तुम पागल है और पागल करने को कोई जरूरत नहीं है. Really, that's what we are saying.
This man gave us 5 lecture sessions in which we covered every single verse of Nagarjuna's Letters to a Friend, a rather enlightening text. The sessions are also available on the Archives YouTube channel linked below. Next up, we have Samdong Rinpoche. He was the first prime minister of the government in exile he gave us a talk on the principal commitments of the Dalai Lama.
शिक्षा से एजुकेशन का कोई मतलब रखते नहीं.
You can find the talk on their YouTube page linked below. You can also hear about the same topic in Tibetan or English.
In the name of religions, they are also violence, struggle, and conflicts.
This is a man who commands respect and makes a lot of sense while doing so. Let's move on to Vinchin Kando. She's Avalokiteshvara's sister-in-law, but I assure you, she's far more than just that. A few years ago, she started something called Project Nuns. They work to educate and empower nuns of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition as teachers and leaders. Traditionally, Buddhist nuns have not had the same access to education as monks. The Tibetan Nuns Project aims to elevate the educational standard and the position of women. They don't care about what Siddharth had to say. They created a groundbreaking education system aimed at both preserving Tibetan culture and empowering the nuns to better adapt to the modern world. We got to visit the Dolmaling Nunnery, where they showed us around the premises, showed us a heart-wrenching documentary, and gave us a Q&A session with some geishamas. They also fed us the most adorable lunch we've ever had. To learn more about Project Nuns, visit the links in the description below. And finally, we arrive at the footsteps of His Holiness himself. Tenzin Gyatso, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, Avalokiteshvara. I'm not going to waste your time by giving you an introduction. You already know who Avalokiteshvara is. For obvious reasons, we weren't allowed to document the private audience. But I managed to find this clip from a local news outlet who were permitted to cover the event.
I always take a Tibetan doctor and also allopathic also the doctor. They say my physical very good. So another 15-20 years, no question, I live. And my physical condition quite strong. So if necessary, boxing. Now, because 88 years old, I can.
At the end of the session, they handed us an envelope. It had 2 pouches of Tibetan medicine and an instruction manual on how to use them. There's a lot to be said about this medicine, but something worth noting is that these pills have heard the chant Om Mani Padme Om over a claimed 100 million times. We also received a copy of this bookmark that makes a lot of sense, and the last item in the envelope is a rascality exuding, unbelievably classy you to the Chinese authorities. We got to witness firsthand how a government in exile works. We got to interact with Tenzin Lhokshe.
But the real world is a crazy world where all yearn for maximum exploitation of resources.
And Sekyong Penpa
decided to adopt a different strategy to focus on the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, even as we follow the middle way.
A member of parliament, Dorji Satsen, even showed us around the actual functioning Tibetan parliament. To call it surreal would be an understatement. We were also given an introduction to education in exile, and since a good chunk of this year's Gurukul cohort works in education reform, this was pretty exciting.
I want this, I'm taking this, I'm sorry guys.
First, we visited the Tibetan's Children's Village. They care for and educate orphans, destitute, and refugee children from Tibet. They have over 12,000 children in their care, and their network spans 9 chapters all across India. The school also integrates Tibetan culture as part of the curriculum, because to them, culture is not something separate from education. They may have lost their land, but their traditions will live on through them. The Tonglen School works for similar causes. They give poverty-ridden children hope for the future. Their tagline is compassion in action, and a quick tour of the grounds will show you that these guys mean business. Here are some of the highlights.
खुश रहो प्यार दवो दिन नहीं खराब करना किसे दे नहीं दिलों साथ दवो जिदे नाल रहो फल दी चिंता वे कदे करनी ही नहीं नीयत साफ दिमाग रखो शांत फेरे वेखे किता कुदरत दिंदी साथ कारोबार दा रख लो ध्यान बार वाले आने ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹਾਲ ਪੈਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਜੇਬ 'ਚ ਰੱਖੋ ਦਿਮਾਗ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਖਾਬ 'ਚ ਰੱਖੋ ਰੁਬਾਬ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਤਜਰਬੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਮੈਂ ਕਰਾਂ ਕਿਤਾਬ 'ਚ ਰੱਖੋ ਸੁਭਾਅ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਥਾਲੀ ਦਾ ਬੈਂਗਣ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਨਾ ਤੇ ਕੰਮੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਕਿ ਕਿਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਡਰਨਾ ਪਏ ਹੱਕ ਲਈ ਲੜਨਾ ਬੇਈਮਾਨੀ ਨਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਬਸ ਇਹੋ ਮੈਂ ਸਿੱਖਿਆ ਵਾਂ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਕਲਾ ਦੇ ਲਈ
Naturally, there are many independent organizations working to aid the region. We met representatives of the Tibetan Women's Association, Students for a Free Tibet, Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy, and the Tibetan Youth Congress. Obviously, they all demonstrated their love for identity, justice, and country. The most admirable thing about these people is that they don't fight back with violence. When cowards pick up their swords, they pick up their pens. Their fight for justice also comes with some good old-fashioned Buddhist humor. I figured this is the best way to move to our final segment. The LHA Charitable Trust gave us beginners courses on how to make 3 Tibetan dishes: butter tea, sampa, and of course, dumplings. Guess what we made at my house 2 days after I got back? Unfortunately, I can't spend too much time on food. Read about our session in their blog post linked below. We eventually made our way to Norbalinka Institute. I've been to this place a billion times, yet it never ceases to amaze me. We were given a tour of the premises, and were also lucky enough to paint and wood carve. So this is how they explain wood carving for us beginners. The instructor said that normally they would take a day to properly carve what we did, but we only had 2.5 hours. So here's the process. First, you draw your design over a block of wood. Then you make your way to the main workshop. Because they didn't want us to lose a finger, the professionals did all the machine work for us. This is what we got back. Then you use the appropriate carving tools and get to work. Once you have something that's taken shape, one of the fellows will remind you that the whole point of this activity is to have fun. Once you're done carving, all you have to do is apply some coating to it, and boom, you have your very own hand-carved fish. Some of the guys were really creative with what they did. Lobsang made a vajra, Soham made a character that I'm just going to call Lao Tzu, and Sonam made this cute little yak. This guy was such a pro and so ahead that he ended up painting it. The paintings were also pretty cool, but I don't have footage for that, so this is what we're doing for now. Besides that, we just had fun. There's really not much to it. To learn more about the art forms, visit Norbalinka's YouTube channel linked below. Next, they showed us around the Tibetan Institute of Performing Arts, also popular for being the official venue of the annual Dharamshala Film Festival. His Holiness conceived of TIPA to protect and maintain Tibetan performance arts. And that's exactly what they do. Here's them playing some really cool instruments. Here's them dancing with unbelievably elaborate costumes as if it's nothing. Here's them trying to teach us the Tibetan circle dance. I mean, it may not have been perfect, but it was really fun. Up next, we have a man that will go down in history books. We got to meet Tenzin Sundu. This guy is nothing short of brilliant.
Chinese Prime Minister was meeting scientists on the ground floor of the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. A Tibetan protester held a dramatic protest on the roof. He unfurled a Free Tibet flag and shouted slogans. Finally, the police took him away.
So I was hugely inspired by Bhagat Singh, like, jao or kuch karo, that kind of thing.
He gave us my favorite session of the program. Not to mention it took place in his famed room, which basically houses his entire being. At the end of the session, Afan also sang us a beautiful original ghazal. Since I can only bring up one more session, let's talk about the Tibet Museum. This man is Tenzin Topfen. He's the director of the museum. He also volunteered to be our guide. For obvious reasons, this is a very important museum. It also happens to be one of the very few that doesn't cower into giving a neutral stance in their narrative. It was literally written on the walls. And they gave me a poster so it could be written on mine as well. For anyone interested, feel free to download their app and go on a guided virtual tour of the museum. There was so much more that we got to do which I can't cover in this video, so I'm just going to mention a few of them. We got to see the Dalai Lama Museum that's not yet open to the public, which is why I can't really show you any footage. But I can share a hipfire shot of a really cool Tibetan mat that they have. There was another place we didn't manage to get footage, but outside of the sessions, a few of us got to meet Den Fun. This guy. He even signed our copies of his newest collection of poetry. Here's one of the poems. We even got to sit down with the poet Punchung Sonam. I talk more about the session, but I'd rather keep this one for ourselves. We got an audience with Tenzin Mariko and Noshi Kodon, surrounding authentic expression.
Very bullying childhood I had in monastery. But the good thing I had is what I feel today is what I have learned in my life, the lesson that I have, the compassion, the kindness that that I have practiced every day. That started from that root. So I'm so glad that he did that to put me in a monastery, and I am so glad that I don't feel regret going to monastery.
We went to the Museum of Himalayan Arts, where Abhiraj and Sara gave us a guided tour, followed by an arts and crafts session with these Thangka masters. Sonam also managed to click a picture of me in pure existential dread, and also caught us right as Afan was being hilarious. Then we had some dham. We had a session with Tibet TV, where we got some really fun pictures. We had an art-filled day at Dolls for Tibet, and I also got myself this cute little monk with glasses. We also visited the Tibetan Medical and Astrological Institute, where they gave us a guided tour of the premises. And we all did so much more that I wish I could cover in this video. The 27th annual Gurukul program was the most fun, informative, healing, and just all-around brilliant expeditions that I've ever been on. I got to meet all these beautiful, original, compassionate, capable human beings. I don't doubt that every single one of them is on their way to leaving a legacy, one built with genuine honor, and not at the expense of others. The Tibetan people have been through hell and back. They have faced decades of injustices and hurt, yet choose to combat with kindness and compassion.
Corruption and bully together. And
The expedition gave me a very thorough reminder that although it might initially seem gloomy, once you fundamentally redefine what you mean by compassion, suffering, kindness, the word I, and you also realize thoroughly that there is no such thing as progression through time.
In fact, present is the only time you have.
There's no actual experience of a past and the future. All we experience is now.
What you'll conclude is that Buddhism really does make a lot of sense. Which is why I don't care what your beliefs are, what your political alignment is, what philosophy you live by, the color of your skin, your past misdeeds, how old you are, or anything of the sort. For the sole reason that you are human, for the sole reason that you have to wake up and go through the same crap, the same injustices that all of us are made to go through, I extend to you from the Sangha solidarity in suffering.
So I'm saying my goodbyes. Goodbye to my good side. It only ever got me hurt, and I finally learned it's a cool, cool world. It's a cool, cool world.
अन्ना ते लाओ संगीत अखां करो बंद दिल ते लाओ संगीत सोच वे बुलंद रूह ते लाओ संगीत नफरत हो जो खत्म दिमाग ते लाओ संगीत दुनिया बेअंत